My name is Beatrice Langford. I am 68 years old, and for more than 3 decades I believed I lived a steady and uneventful life. People used to describe me as the kind of woman who kept a home running, remembered birthdays, and made a pot of soup that could calm the sharpest storm inside any heart. I worked quietly as a school librarian for 31 years. I organized shelves, mended torn pages, and listened to children whisper secrets between the rows of books. My life was simple, or at least I thought it was. For 37 years, every Tuesday at exactly 2 in the afternoon, my husband Harold went to the bank. He never missed a single week. Not when he was tired, not when it rained, not when our children had school plays or dental appointments, not even on the Tuesday after his mother passed away. He always put on the same brown coat, he always took the same route, and he always returned carrying a faint smell of old paper, metal, and winter air. I never questioned it. I trusted him the way a woman of my generation was taught to trust her husband, quietly, without doubting, without intruding into the space he called responsibility. People sometimes asked if it bothered me. I used to smile and say that routines made Harold feel useful. I believed that. I believed everything about him. But the Tuesday after he died, something inside me shifted. Something small at first, like the snap of a thread you barely hear. I walked into the bank alone, holding a key I had never seen, although my name was engraved on the access form as the secondary holder. The hall smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. The lights hummed above me, too bright for a place where people came to confront truths they had avoided for years. I felt as though the air itself was bracing for what I was about to witness. Carmela, the young bank employee who recognized me from the funeral, guided me to the safe deposit room. She opened the door with a softness that made me uneasy, as if she knew what waited behind the metal. She did not step inside. She stayed in the hall and watched me with a look I could not decipher, part sympathy, part warning. The room was silent, the kind of silence that grows heavy in your hands and presses against your lungs. I sat down in front of the narrow metal drawer and placed the tiny key in the lock. My fingers trembled against the cold surface. The key clicked into place with a sound that felt too loud for such a small object. For 37 years, my husband went to the bank every Tuesday. When he died, I discovered why, and my world shattered. When I pulled the box open, I expected documents or investments or something practical. Instead, I saw a sealed envelope with my name written in Harold's careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had once signed birthday cards and grocery lists, the same handwriting that comforted our children when they were young. Seeing it felt like being struck across the chest. The envelope lay on top of a stack of papers. Some were clipped together, some had dates that stretched back decades. A faint smell of dust and ink rose from the box. I reached for the envelope, but my hand stalled. Something inside me resisted, as if opening it meant tearing away the last illusion I had wrapped my life around. I held the envelope, feeling its weight against my palm. My breath shook. I remember thinking, with a kind of hollow clarity, that there are moments in a woman's life when truth is no longer a choice. It becomes a doorway, and the only way out is through it. In that cold metal room, I heard my own voice in my head, a voice I had ignored for years, a voice that whispered a confession I never dared to say out loud. I had loved a man so completely that I had forgotten to look at him clearly. I had trusted him so deeply that I had misplaced pieces of myself along the way. I had given him the benefit of every doubt, even when doubt was the only thing that could have saved me. I used to believe that loyalty was the same as goodness, that patience was the same as love, that silence was the same as harmony. But in that room, I discovered silence can also be the echo of everything you were never allowed to ask. I looked at the envelope again. My name curved across the paper in Harold's steady strokes. It felt like a hand reaching from the past, a hand asking me to learn the truth he had never spoken. I whispered something I had never said before. I whispered that I had once trusted a man so fully that I lost parts of myself along the way. Then I slid the envelope into my bag, not to delay the truth, but to honor the weight of finally being ready for it. As I stood up, I caught sight of the small brass key resting in the drawer, the same key Harold had guarded for 37 years. I picked it up and held it tightly. That key would become the object that carried me through the darkest truths of my life, an anchor, a reminder, a witness. Before we go any further, if this story resonates with you, I invite you to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps bring more quiet stories of strength and healing to life. When I left the bank that day, the cold air outside felt different against my skin, sharper, as if the world had shifted a fraction of an inch and nothing sat quite where it used to. The small brass key lay inside my coat pocket, tapping lightly against my phone with each step. That steady tap seemed to echo the rhythm of my memories, pulling me back into the long stretch of years when I believed everything in my life was safe, predictable, and lovingly chosen. Harold had always been the quiet sort of man people admire without questioning. He carried himself with the calm of someone who understood routines better than feelings. He spoke gently. He walked with purpose. He kept his shirts pressed and his shoes lined neatly by the door. Even the way he breathed seemed measured. He believed, in order with the same devotion other men reserved for religion. I used to think it was comforting. I used to think predictability was a kind of love. He had small habits that never changed. His wallet always went into the same drawer near the kitchen window. His keys always hung on the second hook. His shoes always pointed outward. And every Tuesday at exactly 2 p.m, he left for the bank. It was as reliable as the tide. Rain never stopped him. Snow never slowed him. Disappointment or joy never altered his stride. When the clock hit 2, Harold stood, put on his brown coat, and said the same phrase he had said for decades. "Routine keeps a man disciplined, B." The first time he said it, I laughed softly. It was early in our marriage, and we still believed that words could solve anything. I remember asking him why it had to be Tuesday. Why 2 o'clock? Why not Saturday or Thursday at noon? He smiled in that patient way he used to have. Then he kissed my forehead and said, "For our future." Just that. Nothing more. I recall feeling warmed by it, as if he had placed something reassuring into my chest. I carried that warmth for years. Our children grew up on that version of Harold. Daniel always admired him. He used to follow Harold around the house with a little notepad, pretending to study his father's habits. He once told me that if he could be half as put together as his dad, he would consider his life a success. Lauren adored Harold with the passion only a daughter can hold. For a father she believes is perfect. She called him the greatest man in the world, a hero in a brown coat. Whenever Harold lifted her into his arms, she glowed with a kind of joy I never wanted to dim by asking questions. Back then, our household looked peaceful from the outside. Most evenings found us gathered around the oak dining table. I cooked. Harold read through bills or work forms. The children chattered about school. After dinner, I washed the dishes while he returned to his stack of papers. The light from the lamp would fall across his face, softening his features, and I would feel grateful for the life we had built. It seemed steady. It seemed honest. There were moments, though, when a small uncertainty tugged gently at me. Numbers had never scared me, yet Harold dismissed any attempt I made to discuss our finances. Whenever I approached the topic, he leaned back in his chair with that same rehearsed patience and said, "B, numbers only confuse you. Let me handle this." The first time, I accepted it without thinking. The 10th time, something inside me hesitated, but habit and love smothered the hesitation before it could take shape. Looking back now, I can see the moral conflict in those moments, a quiet, almost invisible tug between trust and curiosity, between devotion and awareness. If someone had asked me back then whether I trusted my husband completely, I would have answered yes, without hesitation. That was the kind of woman I was. That was the kind of wife I believed I should be. Yet standing outside the bank on the Tuesday after his death, with the key in my pocket and the truth lingering like a shadow behind me, I found myself wondering why I had never pushed harder, why I had accepted silence as an answer, why I had allowed love to replace clarity. As I walked toward my car, memories unfolded with a new sharpness. Harold leaving at 2 o'clock, his reassuring kiss on my forehead, his refusal to share the numbers that shaped our future. Each memory felt as if someone had taken a soft cloth and wiped the dust away, revealing threads I had never noticed before, threads leading towards something I had been too loyal, too gentle, or perhaps too afraid to see. I gripped the steering wheel before starting the engine. The weight of the past 37 years pressed against my chest. I whispered into the quiet car the question that echoed in my mind. If I had asked more, if I had insisted on knowing, would Harold have trusted me with the truth, or had he spent decades protecting me from a world he created without me? The answer, I suspected, waited inside that envelope. The envelope in my bag felt heavier with each passing hour, yet I did not open it. I told myself I needed time, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid of learning who Harold had been beneath the quiet routines and the gentle rituals of our life. That fear stayed with me until the morning everything changed. It was a Wednesday. The light coming through the kitchen window had the soft, golden tone I always associated with late autumn. I was folding towels when the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Daniel's name. Something in my chest tightened before I even answered. His voice came through strained and breathless. "Mom, Dad collapsed at work. They are taking him to St. Bartholomew's. You need to come right now." For a moment I could not speak. My throat felt thick, as if the air itself refused to move. I finally managed to say I was on my way. The towel slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. I left it there. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and unfinished thoughts. I parked crookedly, hurried through the sliding doors, and scanned the waiting area for Daniel. When he saw me, he stood up quickly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. He guided me down a hallway where the lights buzzed softly overhead. A nurse led us into a small room where Harold lay motionless on a narrow bed. He looked far older than he had the night before. His skin was still. His chest did not rise. Someone had folded his hands neatly, the way he himself used to arrange everything in his life. I stepped closer. My fingers hovered above his forehead, the place where he had once kissed me and whispered promises that felt solid as stone. I did not cry. Instead, a hollow space opened inside me, wide and cold, like the sound of wind moving through our kitchen late at night when the house settled. It was a quiet that lived beneath my ribs, a quiet that felt too familiar, as if it had been waiting for years. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, trying to steady both of us. I could hear the shaky rhythm of his breathing. He loved his father deeply. I wished I could speak or comfort him or explain the strange numbness settling into my bones, but the words did not come. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a silence that rearranges everything inside you. A soft knock sounded at the door. When it opened, I saw a man I had not expected. Cliff Pearson stepped into the room. Cliff had been Harold's co-worker for decades, the kind of friend who attended every birthday, every neighborhood barbecue, and every holiday gathering. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his face marked with concern. He approached me gently. "B, I am so sorry." His voice cracked on the final word. I nodded, unable to form a reply. Cliff hesitated, then lowered his voice. Harold had been under a lot of pressure lately, more than I have ever seen. He paused, searching my face. "B, did you know anything about it?" The question slipped into my chest like a thorn, sharp, unexpectedly. His eyes held something I could not decipher. Not accusation, not pity, but a quiet urgency, as if Harold had carried a truth so heavy that even the people around him could feel its weight. I shook my head slowly. No, I did not know. The admission tasted bitter. Cliff exhaled with a troubled look. I saw him staring at the floor, then at Harold, then back at me. He seemed as if he wanted to say more, but decided against it. I recognized that hesitation. It was the same kind of restraint Harold had used whenever I asked about the bank or our finances. A practiced gentleness that concealed rather than revealed. When Cliff left the room, His words lingered like smoke. Harold had been stressed, deeply so, and I had known none of it. That realization stung in a way I was not prepared for. Marriage is built on 1,000 details, yet somehow there were entire pieces of Harold's life that existed outside my sight. I stood beside his still body and traced my fingers along the edge of the sheet. The quiet around me felt different now, not just grief, but the faint outline of a truth I had not yet uncovered. The truth waited in the envelope at home. The truth waited in the years I had accepted without question. As I looked at Harold one last time, I whispered the thought forming in my heart. Something had been wrong long before his heart stopped, and I had been too trusting, too gentle, or perhaps too hopeful to see it. 3 days after the funeral, the house felt strangely hollow. People often say grief moves like a tide, rising and falling, sometimes gentle, sometimes merciless. Yet in those first days, it did not rise or fall for me. It simply hovered, a quiet presence that followed me from room to room. I kept expecting to hear Harold's steps in the hallway or the soft thud of his wallet hitting the familiar drawer, but the house remained still. On the third morning, as I was setting a cup of tea on the kitchen table, a knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, a postal worker stood holding a thick white envelope. The sender, printed in the top corner, made my stomach tighten. St. Bartholomew Savings and Trust. For a moment, I considered pretending I had not heard him knock. Instead, I thanked him, closed the door, and sat down slowly. The envelope felt heavy, as though the paper inside carried more than information. I slid a finger under the edge and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter printed on crisp stationery and a set of documents outlining access to a safe deposit box. To my confusion, my name appeared clearly, not as an emergency contact, not as a beneficiary, but as the secondary holder of a box I had never heard of. My breath tightened. The date of registration was 12 years earlier. That detail struck me with a strange kind of ache. 12 years. All that time, my name had been tied to something Harold never once mentioned. I stared at those lines until the words blurred. Later that afternoon, when Daniel stopped by to check on me, he noticed the papers on the table. His brow furrowed as he read the letter. "Mom, you should not go there alone. Let me come with you." His voice was gentle, almost pleading, but also protective in that way adult children sometimes become when they first realize their parents can break. I appreciated his concern, but something inside me had shifted since the moment I first held the brass key in the bank, a soft but undeniable pull toward understanding, toward reclaiming something I had unknowingly forfeited over the years. I looked at Daniel, placed my hand on his arm, and said, "I need to do this myself." His eyes held worry, but he nodded. The next morning, I dressed with a steadiness that surprised me. I chose Harold's favorite navy scarf, the one he always said brought out the silver in my hair. I was not sure why I reached for it. Perhaps I needed one familiar thing as I stepped toward whatever waited at the bank. When I arrived, the lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and polished tile. The fluorescent lights reflected sharply across the glossy floor. People moved quietly between counters, their voices reduced to low murmurs. I felt both visible and invisible at the same time, as if the building itself recognized me. Carmela, the same young woman who had guided me during my first visit, noticed me almost instantly. She walked over with a careful expression, the kind used for people who have recently lost something precious. "Mrs. Langford, you received our letter." Her voice carried a tone of rehearsed sympathy. I nodded and held up the papers. She motioned for me to follow her down a narrow hallway. As we walked, I felt the weight of Harold's absence press more firmly against my chest. For decades, this place had been part of his life, a part I had never entered. When we reached the safe deposit room, Carmela unlocked the door and stepped aside. I moved past her, feeling the quiet settle around me like a heavy coat. Before I could sit down, she spoke again, but this time her voice softened even further. "Mrs. Langford, are you sure you want to do this alone?" The question hit me with unexpected force. It carried a subtle gravity, as though she understood more about the contents of that box than she could responsibly say. Her eyes searched mine. Not with curiosity, but with caution. A silent warning. A moment that felt suspended in time. I straightened my back and folded the papers in my hands. Yes, I am sure. Carmela hesitated for only one heartbeat, then nodded respectfully and closed the door behind me. The sound of it clicking shut felt final, almost ceremonial. I sat down at the small metal table and placed the key in front of me. For years, Harold had walked into this world without me, guarding truths I had never been invited to understand. Now I was here alone, standing at the edge of whatever those truths would reveal. The box waited in front of me, its metal surface cool and impassive. I took a long breath and reached for the key, feeling a quiet strength settle into my hands. Whatever waited inside, it was time to begin stitching together the pieces of a story I had lived beside but never fully seen. The metal drawer slid out with a muted scrape, the kind of sound that seems to stretch time rather than mark it. I stood still for a moment, letting the cold air of the vault settle around me. My fingers hovered above the handle of the safe deposit box, unable to touch it just yet. I felt as though I were standing on the threshold of a room I had lived beside for decades but had never been allowed to enter. A room built from secrets I had not known existed. Slowly, I lowered myself into the chair. The metal felt unforgiving beneath me. I placed the key into the lock and turned it. The click sounded sharper this time, almost like a break in the air. When I lifted the lid, a faint smell rose from inside, a mixture of old paper, dust, and something else I could not immediately name, something that reminded me of a past I had trusted without question. I hesitated, then reached into the box. The first thing my hand touched was a thick stack of documents, each one held together by rusted metal clips. I pulled them out carefully and set them on the table. The weight of the stack was startling. These papers had mass, history, intention. They had lived in this darkness long enough to feel like stones in my hands. I opened the top file. My name appeared across the page, written in blue ink in a style that mimicked my handwriting. But it was not mine. I knew every curve of my signature. I had practiced it as a young woman, shaping each letter with pride when I signed my first school contract. The signature on this document curved differently, too neat, too deliberate. Someone had imitated my hand. Harold had imitated my hand. The air in the room grew tighter. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt as though it had been wrapped in thin wires. Every document beneath the first revealed another signature that claimed to be mine. They were attached to loan agreements, revisions, renewals. I turned each page slowly, allowing the truth to unfold at a pace my heart could withstand. Then I saw the words that made my hands tremble: deed of trust, renewal of mortgage, adjustment to home equity line. 3 separate times, our home, the house we had raised Daniel and Lauren in, the house where I had cooked, prayed, argued, forgiven, and loved, the house I had believed was the one steady place in my life. Harold had mortgaged it 3 times without telling me. I swallowed hard. The effort felt visible, as though someone could watch it happening in my throat. I pressed my palm flat on the table to keep it from shaking too violently. I reached for the next folder. Inside were printed statements from an account I had always assumed was Harold's retirement fund. Line after line showed withdrawals, transfers, adjustments that made no sense. The ending balance sat at 0. The account was empty. 12 years of losses. 12 years he never spoke of. 12 years he carried a burden alone or chose to hide it. I could not decide which explanation hurt more. Another folder contained investment summaries, each printed with neat charts and clear downward arrows. Some years were worse than others, but the pattern never shifted. Loss after loss, year after year. I traced the lines with my finger. They felt like scars someone had tried to cover with polite silence. At the bottom of the box, beneath all the financial wreckage, lay a small, worn bundle wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. I knew Harold's handwriting before I even turned it over. The words written across the front struck something deep inside me, for B to read. I held the bundle gently, almost reverently. The paper felt fragile, as though time had thinned it. The knot in the twine had been tied carefully, with intention. Harold had prepared this. Harold had chosen the words. Harold had placed it here for me to find after he was gone. My thumb brushed over the letters of my name. The room grew impossibly quiet, so quiet that I could hear the faint rasp of my own breath. I wanted to open the package right there, to rip the twine and confront whatever explanation Harold believed would soften the truth. But something inside me resisted. A small voice, steady and clear, urged patience. Not yet. I set the bundle aside. If I opened it too soon, I feared I would drown in the answer before I understood the question. The truth I had already uncovered sat inside me like a blade pressed flat against the skin. Not breaking it, not cutting, just waiting. I inhaled deeply, my breath shaking as though each inhale cost me more strength than I had. I exhaled slowly, trying to gather myself around the silent ache blooming in my ribs. I did not cry. Instead, a tremor rolled through my hands, and then another. My breath came unevenly, each inhale sharper than the one before. It felt like the first crack in a vase that had been held together by years of habit and trust. The truth had finally begun to show itself, and I understood there was no turning back. I sat there in the cold vault room for a long time, staring at the brown paper bundle that carried my name in Harold's familiar handwriting. My fingers traced the letters again and again, as if touching them might steady the tremor moving through my chest. All around me lay the evidence of a life I had never known I was living. Mortgages I had not agreed to, accounts drained to nothing, losses that stretched over years. Every page whispered a truth Harold had chosen not to speak. When I finally untied the twine and unfolded the paper, a single envelope slipped out. It was worn and slightly creased, as though Harold had held it many times before placing it inside the box. My name appeared once more across the front. The ink had faded just enough to suggest age, but the strokes were steady, intentional. I opened it with care. Inside was a letter written in Harold's neat, deliberate handwriting. The same handwriting he used for grocery lists, birthday cards, and encouragement notes he slipped into our children's backpacks when they were young. But the tone of this letter was different, heavy, strained, colored by something like regret. My dear B, if you are reading this, then I am no longer able to explain all of this in person. I am sorry for what you have found. I am sorry for the years of wait I kept from you. I am sorry for using your name to borrow more than I could repay. I am sorry for the burden I have placed on your shoulders. I paused, letting the silence of the room absorb the words. My breath felt thin. I continued reading. I thought I had more time. I thought I could fix the losses before they reached you. I thought I could make everything right again. But time did not bend to my plans. Time betrayed me. Here Harold's handwriting wavered for the first time, the line dipping slightly before regaining control. I never wanted you to carry this. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to shield you from my failures. I believed I would find a way out before you ever had to know. I was wrong. And I hope you can forgive the man who tried to spare you, even when sparing you meant hiding the truth. I set the letter down slowly. The paper trembled in my hands. The words blurred for a moment as my breath caught on something heavy and unspoken. Time did not betray you, Harold. The thought rose inside me with a clarity that surprised me. You betrayed yourself. You betrayed the part of you that once believed honesty was the foundation of a good marriage. You betrayed the trust you asked me to give without question. You betrayed the life we built because you chose silence over partnership. I did not speak those words aloud. They lived quietly in my chest, steady and undeniable. For a long moment, I closed my eyes. Images surfaced in my mind with a sudden, painful sharpness. Not memories Harold had mentioned, memories he had never known about. 15 years earlier, we had faced our first real financial struggle. Harold had lost a contract at work, and for months his stress seeped into everything. He walked around with his shoulders tight and his eyes shadowed by worry. He told me he needed extra funds to stabilize things. He insisted he would never ask if it were not necessary. He promised it would be temporary. I remembered watching him pacing the kitchen floor that night, His hands kept rubbing together as though friction could create a solution. Something in me broke at the sight. I slipped quietly into our bedroom, opened the small wooden box I kept hidden beneath a stack of quilts, and removed my grandmother's wedding ring, a thin gold band with a modest stone, the only heirloom she had left me, the only piece of her I still carried. The next morning, while Harold was at work, I walked to a jewelry store 2 blocks from the library where I worked. I sold the ring. The man behind the counter asked if I was sure. I nodded, even though my throat ached. I placed the cash into an envelope and left it on Harold's desk without a note. He never asked where it came from. He assumed it was a small loan from a friend or a temporary bonus. He never knew what it had cost me, and I had chosen not to tell him. I had believed, then, that protecting his pride was part of loving him. Sitting there in the cold vault room, I realized something with a quiet ache. Harold thought he had carried his burden alone. He thought he had spared me. He thought hiding the truth was a kindness. He never knew that I had carried pieces of his burden long before he hid them. He never knew that I had sacrificed something precious, the last thing my grandmother had left me, to help him in a moment of panic. He never knew that I had seen the early signs of his unraveling, even if I never understood their full shape. The twist of it settled inside me like a small, hard truth. I had given more than Harold ever realized. I had whispered my fears into silence so his confidence could stand. I had tried to save a part of him he did not even know was breaking. When I folded the letter back into its envelope, my hand steadied. The hurt did not disappear, but something shifted. A new clarity took its place. I understood the depth of Harold's fear. I understood his desperation, but I also understood the cost of a love built on one-sided protection. I stood, holding the letter against my chest, and felt the weight of both our silences. One chosen, one inherited, both shaping the truth I was only now beginning to see clearly. When I left the bank that evening, Harold's letter stayed, pressed against my chest inside my coat, as though the weight of it might anchor me, but nothing prepared me for the moment I would have to reveal the truth to our children. I spent the night sorting the documents into careful stacks on the dining table, each page a quiet witness to the years Harold had spent struggling alone or choosing to hide his struggles from me. The house was silent except for the soft pull of pages and the rhythmic sound of my breathing, steady but fragile. Daniel arrived first the next morning. He had always been the child who moved quickly when someone needed help, and he walked into the house with an earnest concern that tightened something in my heart. When he saw the documents spread across the table, he paused. His eyes narrowed slightly as he tried to understand what he was looking at. I handed him the first set of files, the ones with the forged signatures. He read the top page, then another, then another. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to something like grief. He sank into the chair across from me, the weight of the truth pulling him down as though the floor were tilting beneath him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Did Dad really do this?" I nodded. The answer felt heavy even in silence. Daniel pressed his palms to his forehead. I watched his shoulders rise and fall, each breath hard-won. I could see the father he idolized rearranging itself in his mind piece by piece. The realization hurt him deeply, and for a moment I wondered if telling him had been a kindness or another wound. Before either of us could say more, Lauren arrived. She had always been the fiery one, the child who spoke with absolute certainty even when she did not yet understand the whole story. When she stepped into the dining room and saw Daniel's expression, she turned sharply toward me. "What is going on?" Her voice held a tremor of alarm. I handed her the same set of files. She scanned them quickly, her breath catching. But instead of sitting down, she stepped back as if the pages had physically pushed her. "No!" Her voice rose in disbelief. "No, this is wrong. This is not him. Mom, what are you doing? You are tearing down Dad's name when he cannot defend himself." Daniel stood to speak, but I lifted my hand gently to stop him. I knew Lauren. I knew the way her love for Harold shaped her understanding of the world. I let her words land without reacting. Sometimes silence is the only shield that does not escalate a wound. Lauren's eyes filled with emotion, a mix of anger and fear. "You are bashing his memory. None of this makes sense. Dad was a good man. He was disciplined, responsible. He was everything we believed." I did not argue. I did not try to convince her. I simply stood there, absorbing each accusation with the same quiet strength that had carried me through the vault. Lauren's reaction came from love, not cruelty. She wanted her father to remain a hero, untouched by human flaw. And in that moment, I understood that the truth asks different prices from each of us. Daniel stepped toward her, speaking softer than I had expected. "Lauren, look at the signatures. Look at the dates. Look at the numbers. This is real." She shook her head, refusing to let the evidence settle. Her voice cracked as she turned away from us. "I cannot do this. Not now." She left the house with hurried steps, the sound of the door closing echoing through the hallway like a quiet fracture. After she left, the silence between Daniel and me stretched into something tender, something shared. He placed a hand on my arm, grounding both of us. We did not discuss solutions. We did not try to understand the impossible. We simply stood in the quiet space grief had carved between us. Later that afternoon, as the light in the house softened, a knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, I found Cliff Pearson standing on the porch. He removed his hat respectfully and stepped inside when I invited him. He glanced at the table covered in documents and let out a slow exhale. "B, I was hoping this would not fall on you this way." I gestured for him to sit. His hands rested on his knees, fingers interlaced, knuckles tight. For a moment he looked older, as though the truth had been heavy on him as well. "Harold came to me more than once asking for help with short-term loans," Cliff said quietly. "He always said it was temporary. He always promised to repay. But he looked tired, more tired than any man should. Some days he could barely keep his eyes open at work. I tried to talk to him, but he insisted everything was under control. I listened, absorbing each word like a thread stitching itself into a story I had not known." Cliff looked at me with a softness that felt both kind and painful. "B, you trusted him so completely that you could not see he was sinking." The words struck something deep within me, not as blame but as a truth, spoken with gentleness. A truth I had not allowed myself to admit. Harold's unraveling had begun long before the numbers revealed themselves, and I had been standing beside him without understanding the depths he was trying to hide. Cliff placed a hand over mine, steady and sincere. "None of this is your fault. Love can make us blind to the quiet breaking of the people we care for." His words settled into me like a quiet echo, opening a space where understanding could finally begin to take shape. Cliff's visit lingered with me long after he left. His words echoed through the rooms of my house as though the walls themselves needed time to absorb them. "You trusted him so completely that you could not see he was sinking." I stood there after he closed the door behind him, feeling as though a thin film had lifted from my eyes. I was beginning to see Harold's choices in a new light, not as a betrayal born from malice, but as a man drowning quietly while trying to keep the surface calm for everyone else. Yet sympathy could not erase the legal truth. My name had been used without my consent. The forged signatures were real. The debt was real. And somewhere in the confusion of grief and discovery, I realized I needed help. Real help. Not emotional, not tentative, but practical and grounded. I needed someone who could navigate the world I had unknowingly stepped into. Daniel suggested an attorney he trusted, a woman named Marianne Brooks. When he mentioned her, something inside me tightened. I was not accustomed to asking for assistance. For years I had solved small problems with patience and larger ones with prayer. But this was different. This required a kind of courage I had never practiced. I made the appointment. Marianne's office was tucked upstairs in a modest brick building downtown. No polished glass, no intimidating conference tables. When I walked in, I was greeted by the scent of old books and lavender polish. Marianne herself stood behind a desk scattered with color-coded folders. She was in her late 50s with a calm face and eyes that held the kind of clarity a person earns only after surviving their own storms. She shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit. I placed the files on the desk, my fingers brushing the edge of Harold's letter as I released them. Marianne watched me carefully, as though measuring not just the documents but the woman carrying them. I began explaining, slowly at first, then with growing steadiness. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the first folder and examined the forged signature. Her brow lifted slightly. "Mrs. Langford, this is not a misunderstanding." Her voice was level. "This is a form of financial abuse." The word hit me with more force than I expected. Abuse. It felt heavy, unsettling, almost accusatory. For a moment I could not breathe. Harold had been many things, but abusive was not one of them. The term clashed violently with the man I had loved, the father my children had adored. Marianne must have seen something flicker across my face because she folded her hands and leaned slightly forward. "Financial abuse is not about cruelty," she said gently. "It is about control or omission or making decisions that remove your autonomy. It can happen even when the person believes they are protecting you. It is still a violation of consent." I stared at the documents, the forged signature staring back at me like a quiet accusation. My heart resisted the word, but my mind recognized its truth. I exhaled slowly, processing the shape of this new reality. "I do not want to think of him that way," I whispered. "You do not have to villainize him," Marianne replied. "But you do have to protect yourself now." Her calm steadiness grounded me. She began outlining a plan, methodical and clear. First, she would verify the forged signatures formally. Second, she would help me create a timeline of the financial decisions Harold had made using my name. Third, she advised me to record any future conversations that might relate to the loans or the accounts, even with family members, because she suspected there would be inquiries. She placed a small digital recorder in front of me. "Keep this with you. Document everything. It is not paranoia. It is preparation." I nodded, absorbing her guidance like a student learning a new language. For years, I had deferred to Harold on anything involving numbers or logistics. Now I was being handed the tools to reclaim what I had unknowingly surrendered. Marianne continued, "We will also gather supporting evidence, bank statements, letters, email correspondence, anything tied to the loans. You will not face this alone." The way she said it made something inside me loosen. It had been a long time since I felt someone standing clearly on my side. She glanced at me with a softness that surprised me. "You are stronger than you think, Mrs. Langford. Most women who walk into this office carry far more strength than they realize. You are no different." The words settled into me like a quiet reminder, a seed of something I had not felt in months, maybe years. When I left her office, the digital recorder was in my coat pocket, and a folder of action steps was tucked beneath my arm. The evening light stretched across the parking lot, warm and forgiving. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt a strange sense of steadiness rising inside me. Not confidence exactly, but a beginning. I understood now that discovering the truth had not broken me, it woke me. And slowly, with Marianne's guidance, I was learning how to protect myself, even if it meant walking through the pieces of a life that no longer fit together. In the weeks that followed my meetings with Marianne, I began to understand that rebuilding your life after a quiet devastation requires more than legal steps. It requires motion. It requires purpose. Something to hold on to while the ground beneath you settles into a new shape. Marianne had given me structure, but structure alone could not fill the long hours of my days or silence the echo of what had been lost. I realized I needed work, not for the money, though the financial uncertainty certainly loomed large, but for the sense of standing upright again. For years, I had poured my energy into my home, into Harold, into the quiet routines of marriage. Now I needed to pour something into myself. A small pottery shop on Maple Street had recently put a help wanted sign in its window. I had passed it many times, but never stepped inside. The shop always smelled faintly of clay and eucalyptus when the door opened, and the light inside fell warmly across shelves of handmade bowls, vases, and mugs, each one imperfect in the most beautiful way. The owner, a man named Randolph Hale, greeted me with a nod when I walked in to inquire about the position. He was in his early 70s, with quiet eyes and hands that bore the marks of years spent shaping clay. He listened as I explained that I was looking for part-time work. He did not pry into details. He simply offered me the job after a short conversation. "You can start Monday," he said, his voice steady and calm. The work was simple. I tended the register, stocked shelves, cleaned brushes, and helped wrap finished pieces for customers. But the environment held a peace that I had not felt in months. The steady rhythm of the pottery wheel, the soft clinking of tools, the smell of warm clay, and the gentle shapes forming under Randolph's hands brought a quiet steadiness to my days. Every morning I arrived a few minutes before opening, and every morning, without fail, I found a cup of hot tea waiting for me on the small counter near my workspace. Chamomile. Mild, soothing, fragrant. Exactly the kind of tea Harold used to bring me when I felt overwhelmed. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps Randolph had forgotten a cup he brewed for himself. But on the third morning, when I walked in and saw the tea placed precisely where I stood each day, steam curling into the air, I realized it was intentional. I looked toward the back room where Randolph worked. He did not turn around. He did not acknowledge it. He simply continued shaping a lump of clay, his hands moving with practiced patience. The gesture was small, almost invisible, yet it carried a gentleness that reached a place inside me I had been trying to guard. He never asked how I was doing. He never probed into my personal life. He simply placed the tea there every morning, as if to say, without words, that kindness can exist without explanation. In many ways, Randolph became a reflective foil to Harold. Where Harold had hidden his burdens, Randolph carried his life openly. Where Harold had been rigid with routine, Randolph moved with quiet adaptability. And where Harold had kept me outside the rooms where truth lived, Randolph left the door open without demanding that I step inside. One afternoon, as I was restocking a shelf of glazed bowls, a young woman entered the shop. She looked to be in her early 30s with tired eyes and a distracted air. She ran her fingers absent-mindedly along the rim of a mug before letting out a breath that sounded heavy for someone her age. "Is everything all right?" I asked softly. She hesitated, then gave a small, wavering smile. "I am not sure. I think my husband is hiding something from me. Money has been disappearing. He says everything is fine, but I can feel it. Something is wrong." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I saw in her the same uncertainty that had once brushed lightly against my own mind, the same hesitation I had silenced in the name of trust. I wanted to tell her everything, to warn her, to guide her, but instead, I let her speak. She picked up a small vase and turned it in her hands. "I just do not want to accuse him if I am wrong, but I also do not want to ignore it anymore." I nodded slowly. "Sometimes the quiet things tell us the most truth," I said. "Paying attention is not the same as doubting. It is a way of caring for yourself." Tears gathered at the corner of her eyes, though she blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered. After she left, I stood in the stillness of the shop, feeling the weight of her words settle around me. She was a mirror held to my past, a reminder of the questions I had swallowed for years, a reminder of the cost of silence. When I returned to the counter, the tea Randolph had placed there earlier had grown warm but not cold. I lifted the cup and held it between my palms, letting its quiet heat ground me. For the first time since the truth of Harold's choices had unraveled my world, I felt something steady rise inside me. Not happiness, not closure, but resilience. The beginning of a woman learning to stand in her own life again. The day of the hearing arrived with a gray sky that felt heavier than winter should allow. I woke before dawn, stirred by a mixture of dread and determination. The documents Marianne and I had collected were stacked neatly inside a folder on my kitchen counter, each one marked with quiet precision. Forged its signatures. mortgage renewals I had never approved, statements showing a retirement account drained to nothing. The truth lay in those pages, though the truth still felt impossible to hold. Daniel drove me to the courthouse. He insisted, and I did not argue. The silence inside the car was gentle, not strained, the kind that forms between two people walking through the same storm. I glanced at the passenger window and watched familiar streets pass by, feeling as though I were gliding through someone else's life. When we arrived, a cold breeze swept across the steps, carrying the faint smell of rain. Marianne met us at the entrance, her posture calm, her folder clasped tightly beneath her arm. She greeted me with a nod that carried steady reassurance. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too bright and too still. Wooden benches, pale walls, a judge seated above us, expression unreadable. I took my place beside Marianne, my palms resting quietly on my lap. Daniel sat in the row behind me. One chair remained empty beside him, Lauren's chair. She had called the night before, her voice trembling with conflict. "I cannot go. Not yet." I understood, even if it stung. The proceedings began. The bank's attorney stood first, a tall man with polished shoes and a tone that carried both confidence and impatience. He presented the bank's position with swift efficiency. He motioned toward the mortgage documents and the loan renewals. He emphasized my signature on each page. "Mrs. Langford," he said, turning to address me directly, "these loans were taken out in your name. As such, you benefited from them. You lived in the home secured by these loans. You enjoyed the increased liquidity. Therefore, you bear responsibility for the debt." I heard the words, but they felt distant, as if spoken underwater. Marianne rose immediately. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "my client did not sign these documents. We have forensic evidence confirming that her signature was forged." She placed copies on the bench, highlighting inconsistencies in stroke pressure, slope, and pen lift. The judge studied them briefly, but the bank's attorney pressed forward. "Even if the signatures are forged," he said, "Mrs. Langford still lived in the home that benefited from the loans. She still benefited from the financial decisions her husband made. Whether she was aware or not is immaterial. She received the benefit. Therefore, the debt stands." His words lingered in the air like smoke. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Langford, would you like to respond?" I stood. My knees felt unsteady, but something in my chest held firm. The room seemed to narrow, focusing itself around the truth I needed to speak. I inhaled once, letting the steadiness gather. "I benefited from the home," I said softly, but my voice carried across the room. "The home I cleaned for 40 years. The home I cooked in, scrubbed, saved, repaired. The home I kept alive with my own hands. That is the only benefit I received. Not from a signature I never signed. Not from a loan I never approved. Not from a debt I never knew existed." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the bank's attorney hesitated. I lowered my eyes for a moment, gathering the quiet strength inside me. Then I lifted them again. I did not benefit from those loans. I carried it home. I did not carry his choices. Marianne placed a supportive hand on my arm as I sat. Daniel exhaled behind me, the sound quiet but full of relief. The judge reviewed the documents again, flipping through the pages slowly. The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. Only the tapping of his pen broke the stillness. He asked the bank's attorney for proof that I had knowingly participated in the loan decisions. There was none. He asked whether the bank had verified my identity during the signings. They had not. He asked whether any conversations existed showing my involvement. The attorney had no answer. Finally, the judge closed the folder. The sound felt final. "This case hinges on consent," he said, "and there is no evidence that Mrs. Langford gave any. The forged signatures, the financial documents, and the circumstances all point to one conclusion. She is not responsible for this debt." My breath caught in my throat. I did not move. I simply let the words settle into the space inside me that had been trembling for months. The judge continued, "The loans are void in relation to Mrs. Langford. The bank will assume responsibility for the oversight that enabled them. This hearing is concluded." The gavel struck. A short, sharp sound, and then silence. Daniel rose first and wrapped his arms around me. his voice unsteady with emotion. "Mom, it is over. You did it." But I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter, a release. A long-held breath finally exhaled after years of silence. I had not known I was living inside. As we stepped out of the courtroom, I looked at the empty space beside Daniel. Lauren's absence ached like a bruise beneath the skin. But healing takes time. Truth requires its own pace. And for the first time, I was learning to honor my own pace too. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed through me like a soft shock. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether my legs would carry me. The judge's words continued replaying in my mind. Not responsible. Loans void. Identity not verified. My name cleared. It felt as though someone had lifted a boulder from my chest. One I had been carrying long before I even knew its weight. Daniel reached me first, his arms wrapped around my shoulders with a tenderness he had not shown since he was a child. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "it is over. You are free." My hands trembled as I held on to him, not out of fear this time, but because the release felt almost too large to contain. Marianne gathered her folders quietly. She did not celebrate or make grand statements. Instead, she touched my arm with a steadying hand. "This is a good judgment," she said. "Fair. You stood strong today." Her words felt like firm ground beneath me. We walked out of the courthouse together. When the doors opened, a wash of warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the steps. It touched my shoulders first, then spread across my arms and face. I closed my eyes for a moment. The warmth felt like a blessing, a gentle acknowledgement that something inside me had finally begun to heal. For months, I had moved through shadows, gathering courage in fragments. Now the sun rested on me as though welcoming me back into the world. Daniel walked beside me, carrying the folder Marianne had prepared. I noticed the way he glanced at me from time to time, not out of worry, but with a quiet pride. It reminded me of the way he used to look at me after school recitals when he thought I was not watching, a subtle, private kind of admiration. When we reached my driveway, he hugged me again before leaving. I watched him drive off, feeling an unexpected lightness settle over my home. The house no longer felt like a monument to Harold's secrets. It felt like a place I could reclaim at my own pace. But healing rarely arrives in a straight line. That evening, just as I had placed a kettle on the stove, a knock sounded at the door, a soft, hesitant knock. When I opened it, I saw Lauren standing there. Her eyes were red, her shoulders tight. She held a manila folder clutched against her chest as if it were a shield. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. I stepped aside to let her in. She walked slowly into the living room, glancing at the familiar furniture as though she were seeing it differently. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us held a lifetime of love, confusion, and unspoken questions. She finally extended the folder toward me. "I found these. I thought you should see them." Her voice trembled in the place where anger had once lived. I took the folder with gentle hands and opened it. Inside were credit card statements, not mine, not Harold's. They bore Lauren's name, charges she had never made, accounts she had not opened. Some transactions went back years. I flipped through page after page, my breath tightening with each one. A familiar pattern emerged, quiet withdrawals, purchases that did not belong to her. A hidden line of credit, masked under a different address. It was Harold's handwriting in the application notes. The room seemed to exhale around me. Lauren's face crumpled. "I think he used my name too, Mom. I did not want to believe it. I fought it. I thought coming here would feel like betraying him. But I cannot carry this alone." She sat on the couch, her hands covering her face. I crossed the room and sat beside her. I did not speak. The urge to comfort with explanations or apologies rose inside me, but I pushed it down. This moment was not about justification. It was about presence. Lauren leaned into me slowly, as though afraid she might break something fragile inside herself. When her head rested on my shoulder, I wrapped my arm around her. The two of us sat there in the soft evening light, holding not just each other, but the truth we had both been avoiding. We did not say sorry. There was no need. The silence between us became a bridge, not a barrier. a place where two women, shaped by the same man's hidden fear, could finally meet without judgment. For years, I believed healing began with words, that apologies and explanations mended wounds. But in that moment, I learned something different. Healing sometimes begins in the quiet space where two people choose to stay, where grief softens just enough for love to breathe again. Lauren lifted her head after a long while. Her eyes were still wet, but clearer now. "I am here, Mom. I want to understand. I want us to understand this together." I nodded, feeling something in my chest loosen, almost like forgiveness, but deeper. Understanding. Compassion. A quiet rebirth of trust. We stayed there until the kettle whistled in the kitchen. I rose to turn off the stove, and when I looked back at her, Lauren offered a small smile. It was fragile, but it held promise. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain that our family's story was not ending with Harold's secrets. It was beginning again, shaped by honesty, resilience, and the quiet strength neither of us had known we possessed. The following Tuesday arrived with a kind of symmetry I could not ignore. For 37 years, Tuesday had belonged to Harold, his schedule, his ritual, his private world. Even after his death, the day carried an echo of him. But that morning, as I stood in front of the mirror fastening my coat, I realized something had shifted. Tuesday no longer felt like a ghost of the past. It felt like a threshold. I stepped outside into the cool afternoon light. The sky was pale blue, washed clean after a night of soft rain. The streets held that quiet freshness that comes after a storm, as though the world had taken a deep breath. I walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. My steps carried me toward a different bank, not the one Harold had visited every week, but a new one on the corner of Willow and Hawthorne, a bank that held no memories, no shadows, no secrets. The glass doors opened with a gentle whoosh, and I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink. Bright light spilled across polished tile. Customers moved quietly between desks. A soft hum of printers blended with the rustle of paper. It felt modern, open, unburdened by the weight of years. A young woman at the reception desk greeted me with a warm smile. "How can we help you today, ma'am?" I took a breath, steadying the quiet resolve inside me. "I would like to open a new account, under a new name." She nodded, unfazed, and led me to a small desk near the windows. Sunlight filtered across the floor, casting long, golden lines. I sat down, feeling the steadiness of the chair beneath me. The woman opened a fresh form on her tablet. "What name would you like to use?" The question lingered in the air for a moment, a simple question for most people. But for me, it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. My fingers touched the edge of the table, grounding myself. Then I spoke clearly, gently, as though the words were both fragile and powerful. "Beatrice Hale." The woman typed the name without hesitation, but I felt it, deep in my chest, a quiet tremor of recognition, of truth. Hale, my maiden name. The name I had carried long before I knew the weight of marriage, long before Harold, long before routine replaced dream, long before silence replaced partnership. And yet, there was more. A small, almost invisible thread woven into it now. Randolph's name. A coincidence of bloodline, not relationship, yet it felt like a soft echo of the quiet kindness he had extended to me. Not a replacement for Harold, not a romantic promise, but a reminder that gentleness still existed in the world. The woman handed me a stylus. "Please sign here." For the first time in my life, I signed my maiden name again. The strokes felt unfamiliar at first, as though I were reconnecting with someone I had once known but lost track of over the years. But as the line curved beneath my hand, something inside me settled. A piece of myself returning home. The process continued smoothly. Verifications, confirmations, a few signatures, a few quiet breaths. When everything was complete, the woman reached into a drawer and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a thin, new ATM card. The plastic glinted softly under the sunlight. I held it between my fingers and felt a warmth spread through my chest. A warmth not of triumph, but of reclamation. There are things that fall apart, I thought, so that life can hand you back to yourself. The woman asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head, stood slowly, and thanked her. As I walked toward the exit, the sunlight shifted across the floor, brushing the edges of my shoes. Outside, the breeze felt cool on my face. The world seemed quieter, as though giving me space to absorb the fullness of the moment. I slipped the new card into my wallet beside the brass key from Harold's deposit box. Both objects rested there, side by side. One symbol of what had broken, the other a symbol of what had been rebuilt. Neither heavy, neither is painful, simply part of the story. On my walk home, I passed the pottery shop. Through the window, I saw Randolph working at the wheel, shaping clay with a steady patience I had come to admire. He did not look up, but something about the sight grounded me, a reminder that kindness can take the form of silence, that new beginnings sometimes come dressed as small gestures, not declarations. I continued down the street, letting the rhythm of my footsteps calm me. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows along the sidewalk, stretching out like a path to somewhere new. When I reached home, I placed the ATM card on the dining table and sat down. The room felt different now, not haunted, not heavy, just mine, fully mine. Every corner, every breath of light, every future possibility. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet settle. Not the suffocating quiet of the vault or the courtroom, but a gentle quiet, a healing quiet, a quiet that made space for breath. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt both whole and in motion, no longer defined by what had been taken from me, no longer shaped by silence, but by choice. I looked down at the ATM card again. Beatrice Hale, a name not new, yet reborn, a name stitched back into my life with careful hands, a name that felt like a beginning. Before ending this story, I want to ask you something from a place of honesty and shared humanity. If you have ever trusted someone so deeply that you lost sight of yourself, how did you find your way back? Tell me your story. Tell me the moment you reclaimed your voice. I would truly like to hear it. I placed my fingers lightly on the card, feeling its smooth surface. Then I let my hand fall to my lap, inhaling slowly. A soft smile rose at the corner of my mouth, not triumphant, not loud, just true. In the gentle stillness of that moment, I felt myself return.